The Dusk Guard, Rise. By Viking ZX. Assembly. Chapter 2. The waiting was always interesting. It didn't matter if you showed up early, on time, or even late to a meeting with a superior officer. Unless it was an emergency, you were going to wait. It was a time-honored tradition as old as the Royal and Night Guard, probably older. So although Steele had arrived precisely 5 minutes before his 5 a.m. appointment with the princesses, he had been standing outside the entrance to Celestia's study for almost 10 minutes. He didn't mind. In fact, he appreciated the gesture. A normal pony such as a noble, a business owner, or even a diplomat would have been welcomed directly on time. But to a military pony the wait was all part of the tradition, a time to collect his thoughts and reflect on what had brought him here before he met with the actual physical event. Of course, in Steele's case, there wasn't much to think about. The contents of his summons had been fairly direct, if somewhat nebulous. He'd spent the next morning setting up everything in Canterville so that he could leave for a few days, saying goodbye to the various residents of the town and thanking them as needed. Summer had agreed to check on his garden every few days, and Cappy had even agreed to keep an eye on his cabin so that things didn't fall into disrepair. In fact, she'd done more than that. "And you don't even know how long you'll be gone?" she asked him, her face plaintive. He shook his head. "I would expect only a week or two." He took one last look at the small cabin he called home and then gave his saddlebags a tug, tightening them down against his flanks. "Thank you for keeping an eye on my cabin for me." "It won't be a problem," she said with another one of her melodious laughs, although this one sounded off-key, as if something behind it was missing. "It'll be easier than I thought. It's more empty than I expected." He shrugged. "I never really did have much to put in it, I guess." "That's..." Her voice trailed off as she mumbled something he couldn't hear. "I'm sorry, what was that?" "Oh, nothing," she said, flashing him a smile. "You'd better get going. You keep adjusting your saddlebags and taking last looks around this place at this rate and you'll never get out." He chuckled and moved for the exit. All right. Point made. I'll get going." He paused at the doorway and looked back at her. "Thank you, Cappy. For watching my home, and for being so friendly." She raised one of her eyebrows, giving him an incredulous look. "Was that supposed to be your goodbye?" she asked, trotting past him and out the open door. "Tell you what. I'll walk with you a ways, and you can use that time to get that head of yours to come up with a better goodbye for a mare than that." Steele pulled himself back to the present. He was here on official business. No matter when his meeting with the princesses was actually supposed to take place, he shouldn't have let his focus slide away. He turned his eyes to the guard that stood beside the doorway. To the left of the door were the familiar Royal Guard escort, both of them unicorns, resplendent in their golden armor and as typical for the guard still as statues. Steele didn't recognize either of them, but both had given him small respectful nods when he had arrived. Either they had heard of him, or they were just treating him as a dignitary. The other two guards were, he guessed, Luna's. While their armor and coats were the same purple and charcoal combination of the Night Guard, the armor itself was spikier, harder, edged. And the ponies themselves were unlike anything that he had seen before, with leathery, dragon-like wings and slitted cat-like eyes that almost seemed to glow with inner light. It was probably the result of a more advanced version of the same spell that made every member of the Royal Guard the same color when they put on their armor. Then again, he thought, looking at the pair, it's hard to tell. A twitch of movement from the Royal Guards caught his eye. One of them was moving forward, eyes fixed on him. "The princesses will see you now," the guard said, his deep voice breaking the silence of the hallway. Steele nodded as the heavy door to the princess's study opened, and then stepped inside. Princess Celestia's study was what he expected to see. Bright colors contrasted with soft pastels, creating a brightly lit but welcoming atmosphere that could have very well been somebody's home instead of the private study of one of the rulers of Equestria. There were a few items that said it was otherwise however, such as a large, slow-rotating globe that hung freely in the air on one side of the room. Or the large map on one wall, covered in languages that he didn't recognize. A phoenix sitting on a perch near a truly massive desk, preening itself. Of course the most telling difference was the two royal alicorns themselves, Princess Celestia and Princess Luna, sitting behind the desk, regal in both appearance and stature. Celestia was just a head taller than her younger sibling, her multi-hued and ethereal mane blowing in an unseen wind as she looked down at him, her coat a pristine white so pure that it seemed to glow from within. Princess Luna was no less impressive, her dark blue coat a stunning contrast to the pure white of her sibling. She was staring down at him, a more stern gaze than Celestia's, accentuated by the dark, star-filled mane that flowed behind her. Her wings were extended unlike Celestia's, giving him a full view all three of the pony races that made up the immortal alicorn's body. His eyes snapped to the horn, the focal point of enough magic to adjust the course of the moon as it circled the planet. Conscious that he was presenting himself before two of the most powerful beings on the planet, he approached the chairs that sat in front of the desk and gave a respectful bow, which both sisters returned with gentle nods. Steele took a seat, his heart pounding, and waited for one of the sisters to speak. He didn't have to wait long. "Steele Song," Luna said. "It is good to finally meet with you face to face." "Thank you, Your Highness. The honor is mine to meet with you both," he said, offering another respectful nod. There was a moment's pause, neither of the sisters speaking. "But," he ventured, "I'm not entirely sure why I'm here." Luna smiled and leaned forward, and Steele felt the tempo of his heart increase. She was an unknown quantity, relatively new compared to Celestia's calm and familiar royal personage. "Surely you must have some theories?" Luna asked, her expression unchanging. "Well, Your Highness," Steele said. He could feel his chest thumping with each nervous heartbeat, but he was refusing to let it show. At least, he hoped he was. "I doubt it's to take over either of the guard divisions, even with Captain Armor away on his honeymoon. You would have contacted me earlier were that the case, and I would be a terrible choice. I never served in the Royal Guard, despite graduating the academy, and there are plenty of ponies in the ranks of the guard who deserve the position more than I." He paused for a moment, waiting. Luna nodded, a motion that he assumed meant for him to continue. "I get it," he thought, his heartbeat slowing slightly. "This is an interview of some kind." He was in familiar territory now. It was a game he'd played with hundreds of clients over the years, even rulers of nations as the princesses were. Even if they move the sun and moon, he thought, a familiar ease settling into his system, they're still clients. Rich, powerful clients who have enough magic to move solar objects. Steele pulled one of the file folders out of his saddlebags and placed it on the desk. "Your Highness' letter," he said, pushing the file forward, "also directed me to go over each and every one of these files, although not saying why. Only 5 of the ponies contained in these files were from either the Royal or the Night Guard, and each of them was clearly marked as such." He gave a small shrug of his shoulders, as much to convey the truth behind his words as to give him time to choose them carefully. "Honestly, my best theory given my personal history would be that you're looking for some sort of short-term bodyguard service performed for someone close to the crown in light of recent events. Say perhaps an escort bodyguard for Princess Mi Amor Cadenza. But," he said, already knowing the flaws of his theory, "she already has a husband who is captain of the Royal Guard. And I doubt she needs much protection, given that she herself is an alicorn. So while I assume that you desire me to pick a number of these ponies to perform some service, what that service is I couldn't say." He sat back, front legs straight, and waited for one of the princesses to respond. It was Celestia who broke the brief silence first. "Well, Steele Song," she said with a wry smile, "it seems you are still very much cut from the same steel you were all those years ago. Tell me, has retirement changed you?" "In what way, Your Highness?" he asked. Luna was watching him closely now, as was Celestia. He held his body still, at perfect attention, his muscles locking into ingrained positions. Celestia smiled. Age affects all ponies, skills weaken with disuse. Tell me, Steel, if you were to face a younger you, would you still be confident in who you are? Steel nodded, confidence on his face. Age catches every pony, Your Highness, but it's had a bit more trouble catching me than most. I've made sure of it. As for my skills, I've kept them as sharp as I can without any pony else to practice with. If I were to face a younger me, I'm confident that I would win, even if he did outmatch me in strength and speed. A lifetime of experience is on my side. He could still feel his heart pounding, but now it was a comfort, brought about by a familiar question. The two sisters looked at each other for a moment, and although they exchanged no words, Steel could see subtle movements in their faces, as if they were talking to one another in a manner he couldn't hear. After a moment's silent deliberation, they turned to face him once more. This time Luna addressed him. Steel, are you familiar with each of the ponies in the files you carry with you? Familiar in what way, Your Highness? He asked. I've known several of them personally. Familiar with the files themselves, Luna replied. For example, if I were to ask you to choose 5 ponies from within those files to serve as a diplomatic guard at this moment, would you be able to do so? Steel reached into his saddlebags and pulled out the stack of file folders, his mind racing as he carefully arrayed them on the desk, spreading them out in an overlapping straight line. Then, looking up at the two sisters with a neutral expression on his face, he slid 5 of the files forward. Interesting, Luna remarked, one of the files floating up in front of her. She flipped the folder open, rifling through the pages and examining his choice. After a few moments, the folder snapped shut and Luna passed it to Celestia, who opened it and began her own study of the contents. Steel sat in silence, taking calm, steady breaths as the two diarchs looked over the 5 files. These are commendable choices, Luna said, sliding the last file back into the line at the front of the desk. What if I asked you to assemble the same number to rescue a foal lost in the ever-free forest? Steel felt his brow crease as he leaned forward, pulling the 5 files back into line with the others. He stared down at the row of names for a moment, running the scenario through his head. He's an obvious choice, Steel thought, pushing forward a file labeled Hunter. 2 more choices quickly followed, and then 2 more, 5 in total. Steel sat back, watching as once again the 2 royal alicorns examined his choices. Apprehend a dangerous criminal? Luna asked as soon as her and her sister had finished looking over his choices. Steel thought for a moment, and 5 different files slid forward. Assist the guard in solving a crime. Another set of 5. Defeat a dragon. Defend the palace from invaders. Deal with a natural disaster. Rob a train. The requests grew steadily more and more unusual, but each time without fail he would push 5 files forward, the two sisters would look them over and push them back, and another situation would be given. Escort a scientific expedition. Find a lost city. Detect an impersonator. Then abruptly, the questions stopped. The two sisters looked at each other once more, and again Steel had the feeling that although there was no outward sign, the two sisters were nonetheless conversing with one another. That's a pretty useful trick, he thought as the minutes ticked away. In the corner Princess Celestia's phoenix shook itself awake, looked around the room once, and then covered its head and returned to sleep. Gives them the advantage of being able to talk and sweat out a pony at the same time. The room had grown so quiet Steel could hear the rhythm of his own breaths, a steady in and out pulse that matched only his heartbeat and the tick of the room's clock. Steel's song. Princess Luna asked, the two sisters turning away from one another. What if I asked of you to choose 5 ponies who would be capable of accomplishing all the tasks of which I have asked you at any given moment, at any time, given the proper resources? His eyes widened at the request, and he fought to put a controlled expression back on his face. All of them? He looked down at the files in front of him. He would need 5 ponies that could work well together, that would mesh under any possible circumstance. They needed to be skilled, capable, with a diverse array of experience and ability. Ponies that would function under all sorts of pressures. His mind raced. Then, with infinite care, he put out his hoof and pushed a file forward. Then another. Then a third. A fourth. The final file slid forward, in line with its four fellows. Steele sat back, a confident expression slipping onto his face, but his mind racing. Princess Celestia had been mute through almost the entire interview, saying nothing past her greeting. Why isn't she saying of course, because she's met me before, he realized. Luna's never spoken to me, so she's asking all the questions, which makes it another part of the test. He let one corner of his mouth rise slightly, nodding towards the 5 folders he'd put forward. Are you certain? Luna asked, her visage growing stern once more. Even Celestia's gaze appeared to have hardened somewhat. It's a test, they're trying to psych you out, he reminded himself. You know these files backwards and forwards. If there were ever 5 ponies to do any of the things they've asked, this is them. He steeled his shoulders, giving the sisters a single nod. Absolutely, he said, giving them his most confident look. It appeared to work. Both the sisters looked at each other and then the chosen 5 floated up, each of the princesses examining them with deep scrutiny. These are, most interesting choices, Luna said, peering over an open folder at him. Are you confident that a team comprised of these ponies could excel at almost any task? Steele nodded. Yes. Why? What makes the ponies in these files here, she gestured, more suited to all of the tasks that were previously asked? Drive, he said without pause. When neither of the sisters said anything, he continued. Most of the other ponies in the files you gave me are dedicated to their lives. If you asked them to do something in their field or something related to their cutie mark, they would excel at it. But if you were to ask them to give up their job or their home for something in unfamiliar territory, they would likely decline, or worse yet not give themselves fully to it. These ponies, he said, pointing to the 5 files, I chose because each and every one of them has a drive to accomplish. Steele stood and tapped one of the floating files with his hoof. This pony gave up a promising career in Cloudsdale search and rescue to join the Rangers because he felt he wasn't doing enough. This pony, he tapped another file, used to sneak into various hospitals to care for the patients after her superiors said she'd worked too many hours, and since being forcibly retired, has been caught assisting doctors all over Equestria. Luna was leaning forward now, still looking at him with her stern gaze, but Celestia had leaned back, her face relaxed in a smile. Emboldened, Steele pushed on. Each one of the ponies I've chosen there isn't just good at what they do, physically capable, or bright, he said, tapping the desk for emphasis. They're determined, they have a drive to succeed, and they're each looking for an outlet to that sense of accomplishment. But, he said, a feeling of success welling inside his chest, each of them also has a history of knowing when personal accomplishment takes a backseat to real accomplishment. None of them will ever stop trying, but they know when to change how they try. He sat back down, doing his best to appear an equal amount of respectful and confident. The princesses looked at him for a moment, and then Luna turned to Celestia, the 2 alicorns once again carrying on a silent conversation that he wasn't privy to. Luna's face took on an expression of surprise, followed by one of thought, as if something that Celestia had said had surprised her. I wonder what kind of spell does that? Steele thought, keeping his gaze steady. Even as Luna began to gesture in his direction, he noticed that neither of them had broken direct eye contact. So that's maybe some sort of limiting factor, he thought as Celestia's eyebrows rose just a tad. I wonder how often they've used that during the royal court sessions? The 2 sisters debated for some time, staring at one another and leaving him to his thoughts. Surprisingly, he found that he felt fairly calm despite the situation. He was sitting on a cushioned chair in the private study of the Princess of the Sun herself, discussing, well, he wasn't quite sure what yet. But whatever it was, he was discussing it with not one but two immortals. The two sisters finally broke eye contact with each other, and his body tried in vain to snap to a more attentive position as they turned back towards him. Celestia looked pleased, while Luna had a curious look to her, as if something about the situation had just changed. "Well, Steel Song, it was a pleasure to see you again," Celestia said as she gave him a slight bow of her head. He returned the motion, bowing his head low. "It's always a wonder to see how ponies expand and grow in their talents," she said as she stood and stepped around her desk with a serene grace, her magic gathering several documents and quills in the air behind her as she went. "Unfortunately," she continued, "I have tasks that I must attend to. I can't leave my little ponies in the dark all day, can I?" She winked as she stopped next to him. "My sister will be conducting the rest of this interview with you, but I must say I'm quite curious to hear what you make of it." She gave a light laugh and then continued out of the room, pausing only for a brief "Good morning, Luna," as she left. As the door shut behind her, Luna stood, the dark blue aura of her magic surrounding the 5 files he'd laid out on the desk and pulling them to her side. "Come with me," she said as she moved to follow her sister out of the study. Steel swept the files she'd left back into his saddlebags with one hoof and then threw the bags across his back. He turned into the hall, looking both ways and spotting the dark blue princess already striding down the hall to his left. He scrambled after her, trying to keep up with her swift pace. Unlike her sister, Luna walked with her head held high, as if she was a member of the night guard shadowing her. "Steel Song," Luna said, slowing for a moment and allowing him to catch up, "I assume that you are aware of the changeling incursion that occurred here in Canterlot several weeks ago." "It was a little hard to miss, Your Highness," he said, remembering the fear that had gripped him when the news had reached the small town of Canterville. He'd heard the rumors from his old friends, even seen the barrier over the city when he'd gone to visit his sister and had reassured her that there was little cause for alarm with so much security. When he had heard that Canterlot had nearly fallen, the news had terrified him with worry. "My sister still has nightmares about it," he said, trying to keep emotion out of his voice but failing. "Her whole family does. They try to be happy, to forget it, and for the most part they're doing fine. But a terrifying experience like that doesn't go away easily." He looked up and was surprised to see her looking back down at him. "Is she sad?" he wondered as he saw the look in her eyes. "They didn't even have the worst of it," he said, looking down at the floor as he spoke. "The changelings barely touched their neighborhood, but that only made it worse, I think." Hearing the chaos all around them, they rounded another corner and entered another part of the palace, this one colored in more muted blues. "Was it as bad as the news said it was?" "It was," Luna said with a hard edge to her voice that made his coat stand on end. "The changelings were well prepared. Their queen had fooled even my sister and I, and used her impersonation of the Princess Mi Amor Cadenza to set up everything. My own rooms were carefully warded with sound-muffling spells to keep anyone from being able to alert me, as were the barracks of the night guard, allowing the changelings to quickly overwhelm them with the element of surprise. If not for the actions of Twilight Sparkle, one of the bearers of the elements of harmony, in unmasking the threat and reuniting Shining Armor and Princess Cadenza, Equestria may very well have been overthrown." They had passed into a new section of the palace now, one made of calmer, softer stone that meshed perfectly with the cool blues of the carpet. Luna turned from the hallway and began to ascend a flight of stairs, leaving him no other recourse but to follow. "Since that event my night guard and I have been on constant alert," Luna said as they ascended. "Seeking out remaining cells of changeling soldiers waiting in and around Equestria, a challenge that has been most taxing, but informative as well." The stairs leveled out for a moment, a doorway leading into a grand antechamber resplendent with what looked like old equestrian architecture. "I have 2 studies," Luna said as they crossed the room, a small nearby door opening for them in a glow of blue magic. "One down below in the night court chambers, and a more personal study up here in the lunar tower. I find that I often prefer my private study as it is more personal." She waved him in through the small door, following him a moment later, the door closing with a soft click. Steele couldn't help but let his rigid posture slip a little at the scene before him. Unlike Celestia's neat gold and red study, which had been almost exactly what he had expected of the solar alicorn, Luna's private study was awash with colors of all kinds. Paintings hung from almost every available surface, everything from night scenes to glorious sunrises and ponies playing at local parks. An unfinished painting was sitting on a small easel near a desk at the back of the room, various colors splashed across it but no discernible shapes that he could make out on its surface. There were a few small shelves on the walls as well, carved from a dark wood. Each held numerous smaller paintings as well as photos and a few objects that genuinely puzzled him, such as an antique music box and a dark blue gemstone that seemed to be glowing. Luna walked over to her desk and set the files down on top of it. Despite the relatively large numbers of paintings on the wall, the room felt cozy to Steele rather than cluttered. The floor was clear save for two small chairs that sat to one side of the desk, and the desk itself was just large enough to fill the end of the room without making it seem cramped. As Luna sat down behind the desk, her magic briefly illuminated a door sitting to her right and it swung outward, opening up to a balcony that looked out over western Equestria. The sun was rising at the moment, its eastern ascent outlining shadows across the view with gold rays of early morning light. "If I may ask a somewhat personal question before we attend to business," Luna said as she picked a large and somewhat dusty-looking tome from her desk with her magic, sliding it onto the bookshelf behind her. "What do you think of my paintings?" she asked, gesturing towards them with one hoof. Steele moved across the room's thick, dark-colored carpet, surprised at how effectively it muffled his hoof steps. He wasn't very familiar with art, having spent more time guarding it than actually observing it, but the princess's paintings looked good to his untrained eye. He stopped in front of one that caught his attention, a portrait what looked like a Pegasi family watching as their daughter swooped across a night sky lit with multicolored fire. "The aurora borealis," Luna answered, anticipating his question. "They can sometimes be seen at night if one goes far enough north." Steele nodded, remembering the one occasion where he'd seen something similar, although nowhere nearly as impressive as the painting before him. "I painted that about a year ago," Luna said. "What do you think?" Steele moved his head from one side of the painting to the other, marveling at how the lights in the sky seemed to shift and slide before him as he did so. I think it's very beautiful," he said, admiring the close detail and the feeling of life that the painting exuded. "I wasn't aware that you were a painter." He turned back towards the princess, noticing that she had taken a seat behind her desk, the 5 folders spread out in front of her. "You're very talented," he said, stepping away from the colorful image. Luna gave him a polite smile, nodding. "Well," she said with a smile, "I have had many years to practice. However, I am always finding room for improvement. Perhaps in another few years I will feel comfortable attempting to paint in a more abstract design." She looked at Steele as he sat, and it was only then that he noticed that she was sitting slightly lower than normal, making her just a tad higher than he was instead of towering over him. Improvement is something that we never lose the capacity for as long as we desire it. For a moment her face looked distant, as if she was seeing something faintly out of reach. "Of course, sometimes we must recognize the need for it first." She looked back at Steele as her eyes refocused and her face took on a stern visage once again. "After the changeling invasion was one such moment. Up until then I had never considered the relative strength and readiness of our guard contingents, but it is clear to me now that we were woefully unprepared for such a danger." She rose from her seat, pacing back and forth behind her desk, her wings slightly extended as if she planned on bursting into flight at any moment. The guard fought with skill, but if not for the love of shining armor and Princess Cadenza, they would not have been enough to stop the invasion. "The problem is not that the Royal Guard are not capable enough or unprepared," Luna said, coming to a stop and sitting once more, although her wings remained only half folded, but that they are not prepared to deal with something such as an invasion. Equestria does not have a standing army, nor do my sister or I wish for it to have one. The guard is more than sufficient for most problems that occur in Equestria. However, Luna said, her stern visage growing into a vaguely sinister smile that reminded Steele of the guard trainers he'd sweated under during his time at the academy. In reading over the reports taken of the changeling invasion, I noticed that quite a few guard were rallied by the presence of the elements of harmony, who on their own managed to take down an entire squadron of changeling drones. She paused and floated a small pitcher and glass of water over to herself from a nearby night table, taking a small sip. The inspirational accomplishments of Twilight Sparkle and her 5 friends in the face of such an overwhelming defeat, she continued, were not only a testament to their skills and the power of their friendship, but also an inspiration to those around them. Luna set the small cup down, and Steele was surprised to see that it was nothing more than plain glass, with no ornate designs or extravagance. The events of the changeling invasion have made it clear that a determined force, one of physical magnitude and stamina if not magic, could do great damage to our kingdom if we are not prepared. But we do not wish to expand the Royal or the Night Guard, nor ask more of them than we already do, as it is neither my sister's wish nor mine to create a military force. Steele felt his muscles tense in anticipation. There was more to this than just the 5 ponies he'd picked from the files. Something big, something that was making his old instincts flare with excitement. Which why my sister and I have agreed to form a new contingent of the guard. Luna declared with evident excitement, throwing one hoof into the air as if she'd made a grand proclamation. Wait, what? The words slipped out of his mouth before he could stop them, and Steele immediately snapped himself to attention to cover up his mistake. But the damage was already done. Luna was looking straight at him, what was no doubt going to be a grand speech interrupted. Explain thyself, she said, confused. Was our meaning not clear? Steele thought it best not to draw attention to the fact that she had slipped into Old Equestrian. I apologize, Your Highness, he said. It just caught me off guard, that's all. He saw a faint smile creep onto her face and he let out an inner sigh of relief. Crisis averted. But why not simply expand the current guard rather than adding a new division? Luna's smile widened. I see my faith in you was not misplaced. Indeed, you have the talents that I was seeking for. Something in Steele gave a small twitch, an instinct that there was more to her words than he realized. In answer to your question, Luna continued, I decided that rather than increasing the number of either guard contingent, such funds could be equally well spent producing something akin to the elements of harmony, except as a new division. Steele's eyebrows raised and Luna noticed, giving her head a shake. Not in regards to the power of the elements, she explained, allaying his fears. But rather in regards to the unity and capability those 6 friends share. So, you want a tightly focused team, not just a crew of bodyguards, Steele said, wondering if he was going to inflame the princess by speaking out of turn. Most wonderful, Luna declared, raising her hooves and giving him a wide smile. Steele gave her nervous grin back, still unsure of any proper etiquette for the situation. Yes, we desire something more specialized than a group of guard. Better trained, tougher, faster, and most of all, working together. She gestured to the 5 files spread out upon the desk. We have spent the last few weeks gathering information from all over Equestria, looking for those most suited for such a demanding position. We found thy record most exemplary and worthy of commendation. And now we, Princess of the Night, offer you the position as captain of the new Dusk Guard. Steele's jaw dropped at the princess's announcement, the news hitting him like an overfilled training bag and leaving him dazed. You what? He finally stammered, staring at the princess with wide eyes. I have to have misheard her, he thought. Captain of a new guard division? Me? Were we not clear? Luna asked, her voice straightforward. My sister and I wish you to lead these 5 ponies that you have selected in protecting Equestria, serving as captain of the new guard division. No, no, no. Just making sure that I was on the same page, Steele said quickly, his mind still reeling from the announcement. But you do understand that I'm retired, he asked, scrambling to wrap his focus around what was being asked of him. I'm 51 years old, Your Highness. And yet we have been told that you run every morning, twice the number of miles required of the Royal Guard or Night Guard at their daily training exercises, Luna said, her face stern once more. Is this not true? Well, yes. Yes it is, Steele said, finally letting his jaw close. Then we fail to see why your having retired changes are asking of you to be captain of the Dusk Guard, Luna said. We know your age, and it does not concern us. What does is that you, Steele Song, are a leader. You have led countless ponies through perils all across Equestria and even in the world beyond. You are also powerful, even Celestia spoke highly of your combat ability and your might. But most important of all, you are dedicated to protecting the lives of those around you, as your cutie mark shows. While you may decline our request, Luna said, rising from her seat and standing with her head held tall, wings fully extended, we would be most saddened if thee did, as we believe thee to be the most capable of carrying out the task that we have set before you. She held her hoof to her mouth for a moment, a hint of a smile visible past the silver horseshoes. My apologies, she said, smiling as she dropped her hoof. I still slip into Royal Equestrian from time to time. She sat back down and for a moment there was silence in the study. If it's all the same to you, Your Highness, Steele said after a moment, his mind whirling. I would like to request a day to think upon it. This he looked down at the 5 papers that Luna had laid down on the desk. This would be an undertaking. We would need funding. My sister and I will take care of that, and you will have ample for your needs. Luna said, as if it were the simplest matter in the world. As well as a base of operations. Already determined, simply awaiting a remodel, Luna said, smiling. And these 5 ponies? Steele asked, indicating the files on the desk with one hoof. Will you be extending the same offer to them? Luna shook her head. No, and whether or not you choose to offer them the 5 positions that we would want filled on the Dusk Guard would be up to you. Just know that each of the situations as I asked you about earlier may be required of you at any time, and indeed anything else. So if I accept, Steele said, still feeling slightly dazed, I can choose any 5 ponies I would like to serve on this new guard, but I also am the one who recruits them. He looked down at the 5 files he had chosen. A few of them he could see coming quite willingly, but 1 or 2 of them would probably require some convincing. Almost. Luna said. My sister has one request to make of you should you accept this position. She sat back, still wearing the smile on her face. And having heard her request, I would urge you to accept it as well. What is it? He asked, almost unsure if he should even ask. My sister has requested that you replace one of these 5 with a specific pony, one she believes could do well serving in the Dusk Guard. One of the guard will give you his file as you leave. The final choice is if you accept this position up to you, she said, tilting her head towards him. Princess Luna, Steele let his shoulders drop, shaking his head back and forth. This is exactly what I was afraid of, he thought, looking up at the princess. This is something big, he paused. She did say that the option to accept was mine. As much as I would be honored to serve Equestria in this position, he said, I respectfully ask that I be have some time to think about it. I would expect no less of the famous Steele Song, Princess Luna said, rising to her hooves behind her desk. Will you need long? She asked, walking around the desk and once again towering over him, her starry mane flowing softly in an invisible wind. No, I can return tomorrow morning to give you an answer. Steele answered, rising to his hooves and securing his saddlebags on his back. There was a brief glow as Luna used her magic to pass the 5 files to him and he stowed those as well. I thank you for the offer, regardless of my choice, and also for the opportunity to see your paintings. He gave the Princess of the Night a kneeling bow and then headed for the door. I will see you tomorrow then, Steele Song, Luna said, her voice echoing through the small study. Instruct the guard with Celestia's additional file to show you to the palace gates, and may you enjoy my sister's day. Thank you, Princess. You as well, Steele said as he walked out of the room, his mind spinning. And may I come to a decision that we can both agree on.